Has a man ever made you feel small? Has he ever smirked, dripping with a condescension so thick you could choke on it, convinced he was the best you'd ever have? For Sarah Connolly, that man was her ex-husband, Mark Thompson. A year after their messy divorce, he paraded his new life, the bigger house, the younger woman, the endless self-praise, and publicly mocked Sarah for daring to date down with a quiet, unassuming man. He flaunted his Wall Street success, completely oblivious to the seismic, earth-shattering shift in her world. Little did he know, Sarah's new partner wasn't just successful, he was Leo Valdez, a reclusive titan of technology, whose name governed the future. This is the story of how Sarah stopped fighting for validation and started living for authenticity. The lobby of Sterling Vance Capital was designed to intimidate. It was a cathedral of finance, cold and hushed, clad entirely in slabs of black marble and polished steel that seemed to absorb all sound and warmth. Sarah Connolly shifted her weight, feeling acutely out of place in her tailored grey trousers and soft cashmere sweater. Her fingers were smudged with charcoal dust, a faint residue from the morning's work, and she quickly tucked them into her pockets. She wasn't there for Mark. She was delivering a small framed piece of artwork for a friend's gallery show hosted in the firm's private acquisition lounge, a piece of irony that made her teeth ache. Her friend, a sculptor named Chloe, had secured the commission, and Sarah, needing the favor, had agreed to the drop-off. The air smelled of ozone and money. An immense, abstract sculpture, a jagged wave of bronze, dominated the center of the room, looking less like art and more like a captured financial crash. Sarah felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the psychological echo of 10 years spent navigating this world of high-gloss surfaces and hidden venom. She signed the receipt, turning to leave, when the elevator doors chimed and slid open. And there he was, Mark Thompson. He emerged not alone, but flanked by two junior analysts, their faces identically pale and deferential. Mark was talking, of course, his voice a low, commanding rumble that easily cut through the quiet hum of the lobby. He wore a navy suit that looked poured onto his frame, and the polished crocodile leather of his shoes gleamed like mirrors. His left wrist bore the weight of his chosen symbol, a Patek Philippe annual calendar, its heavy, complex mechanism whispering of effortless, inherited power. Mark stopped mid-sentence, his eyes locking onto Sarah. His expression was not surprise, but the calculated, dismissive smirk he reserved for people who had ceased to be useful to him. Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, loud enough for his entourage to hear, loud enough for the subtext to be clear. "You still orbit my world." Sarah felt the sudden rush of heat to her face, a physical manifestation of the shame he had conditioned her to feel. But she met his gaze, holding it steady. She was no longer his wife, no longer obligated to flinch. "Hello, Mark," she said, keeping her voice even, controlled. "Just dropping off a piece for Chloe's show." "Art, right." He paused, letting the word hang in the air, saturated with pity. "Still teaching, then? Bless your heart. It takes a certain kind of dedication to stay in the non-profit sector in this city." He dismissed the analyst with a quick gesture, signaling that this distraction was personal. He walked closer, his cologne, a sharp, aggressive blend of cedar and spice, enveloping her. "Listen, I was just thinking of you, actually. We should grab a coffee. I have some things I need to catch you up on. Big things. I just closed the deal on the Southampton place. You remember the one? On Meadow Lane." Sarah remembered. A sprawling, obscene fortress of glass and steel that had been a fantasy of his before the divorce. "I'm busy, Mark." "Don't be ridiculous," he chuckled, completely overriding her. "I know you have your little art classes, but surely you have a lunch hour. There's a spot near your old neighborhood, Brooklyn Reclamation. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. I'll make the reservation." It was a summons, not an invitation. A fierce, protective wall rose inside Sarah. She should say no. She needed to say no. But a voice deep inside her, the one that hated leaving things unresolved, whispered, "Go, see what he has to say. You're stronger now." She looked at the Patek Philippe on his wrist, catching the light. A complex machine designed to track time, yet Mark seemed incapable of seeing anything beyond the present moment of his own ego. "Fine," she said against her better judgment. 2 o'clock, but I have to leave by 3. He gave her a triumphant, dismissive nod, already turning away to speak to a passing executive. "See? I knew you'd be reasonable. Don't be late. Punctuality is everything." Sarah walked out into the cold November air, the weight of the steel lobby still pressing down on her. She had agreed to meet him, not out of desire, but out of a morbid curiosity, a need to test the strength of the chains she had broken. She was taking her battle into his chosen terrain, but he had no idea she was bringing an artillery shell wrapped in a simple navy dress. She clutched her worn, leather-bound charcoal sketchpad, her constant companion and symbol of her true self, a small, defiant comfort against the financial magnitude of Mark's world. The aroma of burnt espresso and competitive superiority hung in the air at Brooklyn Reclamation. The cafe was predictably crowded, buzzing with young professionals trying too hard to look relaxed. Mark was late. 21 minutes, Sarah counted, watching the hands of her simple, unadorned Timex. This was his move, establish his time as more valuable than hers. When he finally sauntered in, Mark was radiating aggressive confidence. He leaned over the table, giving her the perfunctory, assessing kiss. A quick, dry press of his lips that felt more like a health inspection than a greeting. "You look healthy, Sarah," he said, using the loaded word that was a euphemism for unpolished in his vocabulary. "I am well, Mark," she replied, her voice low and even. Her concrete action was simply maintaining eye contact, refusing to give him the subtle subservience he craved. The conversation that followed was the performance she had expected. Mark ordered a single origin coffee with a complex backstory and spent 5 minutes complaining about its terroir. Then came the inevitable monologue. He talked about the Southampton house, the marble, the infinity pool, the pain of having to furnish 10,000 square feet. He spoke of his new venture fund, Sterling Vance Select, as if it were a philanthropic endeavor rather than a highly leveraged risk. "It's good, though," he said, leaning forward, his watch catching the fluorescent light. "The market rewards aggression, which is why, honestly, I worry about you." Sarah waited. This was the moment of subtext. "I worry about you." Subtext. "I worry that you are proving I made a mistake by letting you go, and I need to stop that." "You worry about me teaching third graders in Astoria?" she asked, a sliver of ice in her tone. "It's not the children, Sarah, it's the stasis. You had access to a certain level of living. You had the chance to be at the center of things, and you chose to retreat to Queens to teach watercolors. That's not resilience. That's fear. That's settling." The word settling was the scalpel he used to find the old scar tissue. "I love my job, Mark, and my apartment has excellent northern light for sketching," she said, a concrete detail Mark would never comprehend. Mark chuckled, a deep, dismissive rumble. "Ah, the light, always the art. Right, well, as long as you're happy." He paused, his predatory eyes narrowing. "Because I saw you the other day, in the park, with a guy." Here it was. The emotional fantasy he had constructed. He needed to confirm she was failing. "I'm dating someone." "Yes," Sarah confirmed, taking a deliberate sip of her tea. Mark's entire posture shifted. His confidence inflated, his chest pushed out. "Dating, right. Well, he looked a bit rough around the edges, Lenore. A bit too comfortable in a t-shirt. I mean, the man looked like he drove a Prius. Salt of the earth, right? I just hope you're not desperate." Sarah felt a surge of heat, not of shame, but of protective anger for Leo. She thought of Leo's hands, not manicured but capable, hands that had traced the worried lines on her mother's forehead, not the latest stock ticker. "His name is Leo," she stated. "Leo," Mark scoffed. "And what does this Leo do? Bricklayer? Sous chef? Does he sell artisanal coffee right here?" He gestured to the baristas with contempt. "He's a programmer," Sarah said, offering the half-truth. It was tactical. She knew programmer was enough for Mark to dismiss him, but simple enough to avoid lying. A programmer, Mark spat out, rolling the word in his mouth like gravel. A code monkey. Right. That's fine. I mean, it's a step up from a barista. But Sarah, be realistic. You're a high-maintenance woman, always were. You need a certain standard. You think this guy can give you that? A big night out for him is probably splitting a mediocre pizza and watching Netflix. Don't sell yourself short. The arrogance was suffocating. He drained his espresso and stood abruptly. I have to run. Big meeting with Goldman Sachs. Think about what I said. Don't settle. As Mark strode confidently out, leaving his unfinished coffee and the stench of his cologne behind, Sarah felt the emotional fantasy of his superiority crash. He saw simplicity and assumed failure. He saw a man who drove an unpretentious car and assumed poverty. He had no concept of a world where value was internal. Sarah looked down at her sketchpad. She opened it, running her thumb over the rough grain of the charcoal paper. The subtle pressure of the charcoal dust under her nail was a physical connection to her reality. He saw the sketch, but he didn't see the vision. Mark had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The air in the penthouse was different. It was the scent of clean air exchanged, filtered and softened by altitude, the air of the 81st floor overlooking the endless glittering tapestry of Central Park. Sarah stepped out of the private elevator and into the quiet. The penthouse was not ostentatious. It was profoundly expensive in its restraint. Walls were finished in hand-troweled plaster. Floors were pale Scandinavian oak, and the furniture was built for comfort, not show. Dominating the main living area was a massive Joan Mitchell abstract painting, all chaotic, beautiful energy and vibrant color. Mark's entire Hamptons estate likely couldn't buy the canvas. Leo Valdez was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, talking quietly into a headset. He was in his customary attire, a soft grey cashmere sweater and dark jeans. He looked like an architect, or perhaps a visiting scholar. He ended his call and turned, his clear blue eyes lighting up instantly when they landed on Sarah. The transformation from code monkey to titan wasn't visible in his clothes, but in the effortless control that radiated from him, an aura of quietude that could only come from absolute, unshakable power. "You look tired," he said, walking to her and taking her hands, his touch warm and genuine. "Tired of Brooklyn." "I saw Mark," she admitted, letting the tension seep out of her. Leo's expression remained unchanged, but his hands tightened slightly, a micro cliffhanger of controlled anger. The grand performance artist. "He was classic, Mark. Told me I was settling. Called you a code monkey. He's convinced that because you wear a t-shirt, you think a big night out is splitting pizza." Sarah repeated the words, testing them for lingering power. Leo laughed, a soft, rich sound that was completely free of ego. "He sees what he needs to see to maintain his narrative. That's fine." He led her to the massive dining table, where a few large-format screens were laid out, displaying architectural blueprints. "Before you came, I was talking to the team about the academy," Leo said. "They've secured the final permits. We're breaking ground in the spring. They want to know what name we're putting on the cornerstone." He tapped a point on the blueprint. "The Sarah Connolly Academy for Arts and Innovation." Sarah swallowed hard. This was the true scale of Leo's life and the true measure of his love. This wasn't a watch or a house. This was a legacy, a structure built to endure. She thought of a year ago. When Mark was busy finding a younger, blonder replacement, Sarah was fighting a desperate battle. Her mother, Eleanor, was diagnosed with aggressive cancer. Mark had called once, offering to pay for a nice private room. Flashback. Sarah was crying in her small Astoria apartment, the scent of antiseptic clinging to her coat. Leo walked in, saw her pain, and simply asked, "What is the very best option in the world?" 2 days later, Eleanor was not only at the top of the wait list for a rare clinical trial, but had the oncologist herself flying in from Zurich to consult. Leo hadn't asked. He had simply acted, deploying his network of influence like a quiet, devastating force multiplier. "He thinks I'm desperate," Mark does, Sarah murmured, the subtext clear. "I am terrified you are too good to be true." Leo met her eyes. "Desperate is needing a watch to tell the world you're valuable. You left that behind, Sarah. Your value is in this." He tapped the blueprints. "In the light you bring to those kids. Your work." He stood and walked to a large, unmarked, beautiful wood cabinet. He opened it, not to reveal liquor or trophies, but a simple, worn leather folder. "Mark operates in the frequency of visibility. We operate in the frequency of consequence. He is a gambler. We are builders. He will never, ever understand the difference." He handed her the folder. "Final budget proposal. Sign only if you agree. It is yours to command." Sarah opened the folder. The first number, the total commitment from Nexus, was a staggering sum. More money than Mark could ever see in his lifetime, quietly committed to an academy bearing her name. She had left a golden cage, and Leo had gifted her a foundation. She knew then Mark's opinion no longer mattered, but she couldn't help but wish he could see this, just for a second. That tiny, lingering desire for him to know the truth was a micro cliffhanger, a temptation she hadn't yet conquered. Sarah spent the next few weeks trying to convince herself the encounter with Mark was irrelevant. She threw herself into planning the academy curriculum, losing herself in the tactile comfort of her charcoal sketchpad. The rough paper and the smudge of graphite were honest, unlike Mark's world. But Mark Thompson was not done. His ego, bruised by the sight of her composure, demanded retaliation. The campaign began subtly. Mark first unfollowed all of Sarah's mutual friends, signaling a clean, triumphant break. Then he started posting cryptic philosophical pronouncements under photos of him on his massive yacht. "Never regret walking away from weakness. Momentum demands forward movement." Then came the direct digital assault. One Friday evening, as Sarah and Leo were quietly reading, her phone buzzed with the distinctive, unnerving chime of an Instagram tag notification. "Mark Thompson tagged you in a post." Sarah felt the conditioned flinch, a deep, muscular contraction of her stomach that proved Mark still held a tiny, sharp piece of control over her autonomic nervous system. It was a throwback Thursday post, 4 days late, clearly timed for maximum weekend visibility. The photo was from their 10th anniversary trip to the Amalfi Coast. Sarah, then thinner, blonder, and perpetually anxious, was in an expensive white dress he had chosen. Mark was beaming, holding a magnum of champagne. The caption dripped with manufactured sympathy. "Memories from a simpler time with Sarah Connolly. Life sometimes requires hard choices, but I always wish the best for old friends. Hope you're staying true to yourself, wherever you land." Growth. No regrets. Success mindset. The subtext was a scream. "You were best when you were mine. Look how far you've fallen." The calls and texts from their mutual acquaintances started immediately. They weren't malicious, but they were almost worse. They were steeped in pity. "Honey, are you seeing this? He's such a jerk. Don't let him get to you." "I just saw James's post. He looks incredible. Hang in there, S." Sarah felt the narrative Mark had constructed, the poor, abandoned ex-wife, closing in on her. She had escaped the cage, but the invisible prison of his public perception was still standing. She showed Leo the post. He looked at it for a long moment, his gaze analytical, not emotional. "The projection is strong with this one," Leo said dryly, quoting a line from a sci-fi franchise Mark would have considered beneath him. "It's not funny, Leo," Sarah snapped, instantly regretting her tone. "It bothers me. I know it's just a facade, but I feel like he's trying to erase everything I've built here. He's defining me to the world, and that definition is failure." The emotional fantasy piled up, the desire to scream the truth, to post a picture of the academy blueprints, to simply show the world the man she was with. "We could post a counter-narrative," Leo suggested, gently stroking her hair. "No," Sarah sighed. "He wants drama. He wants me to fight back. He wants to drag you into his frequency, and I won't." She closed her eyes. I wish he could see the truth without me having to shout it. Just once. I want that smug certainty wiped clean off his face." Leo was silent for a long beat. When he spoke, his voice was low, conspiratorial, and entirely serious. "Then let's give him a reality check he can't ignore." He stood and walked to his desk. He returned with a thick embossed invitation card, the kind reserved for the city's true elite. "The Beacon of Hope Gala," Leo read aloud. "I'm being honored this year, reluctantly. They want me to give the keynote on Nexus's commitment to education reform." He handed her the card. "It's Mark's personal Super Bowl," Sarah whispered, staring at the invitation. "He buys a table every year. It's where he goes to confirm his alpha status." Leo's eyes held that familiar, mischievous glint. "Exactly. He expects you to be home sketching, alone. He expects me to be a myth. Let's dismantle his entire reality in 5 minutes flat." Sarah felt a thrill, sharp and clean, cut through the residual anxiety. It was a terrifying, brilliant, audacious plan. It was the micro cliffhanger she needed, a decision to walk willingly back into the arena, but this time carrying the weapons of her true life. The next 2 weeks were a blur of intense planning, not for an event, but for a strategic operation. The first step was the armor. Sarah had decided the night she saw the invitation that she couldn't wear any of the gowns Mark had bought her. Those dresses were uniforms, designed to make her look expensive and silent. She needed something that spoke of defiance, autonomy, and her own taste. She found it in a small, nondescript boutique in Greenwich Village, far from the flagship stores Mark frequented. It was a gown of deep, luminous crimson silk, designed by an emerging Italian artist. It was simple, perfectly cut, and powerful. It wasn't flashy, it was resonant. Standing on the velvet platform, staring at her reflection, Sarah felt a wave of the old insecurity wash over her. "It's beautiful, Sarah," the boutique owner murmured, "but perhaps we should add a diamond clasp just to elevate the neckline." "No," Sarah said quickly. She looked at her reflection, the woman in crimson. The subtext of the dress was clear. "I choose myself." The dress needed no added validation. She had worn diamonds worth more than the dress itself during her marriage, and they had felt like shackles. Meanwhile, Leo was handling the logistics, treating the gala like a complex engineering problem. They would arrive late, precisely 30 minutes after the cocktail hour began, ensuring Mark was already holding court. They would enter quietly through a side entrance, avoiding the main press line. One evening, Leo explained the true motivation for the reveal. "The board of the Beacon of Hope has been trying to get me to accept this for years. I always refused," Leo explained, sitting beside her, the charcoal sketchpad resting on her lap. "But the STEM funding is vital, and the mayor is pushing for an initiative that blends arts and tech in the public school system. Mark and his old school cronies hate it. They see tech as pure finance, pure gain. They see art as disposable." Leo took her hand. "This is not about revenge, Sarah. It's about consensus. When I stand up there, I'm not just announcing a donation. I'm announcing a new paradigm, and having you, the artist, the educator, on my arm, that's the statement. It's the ultimate counter-narrative to Mark's old money zero-sum game." Sarah understood. Mark saw the world as a ladder he had climbed. Leo saw the world as a complex network he could reshape. "What about Todd Bishop and Charles?" Sarah asked, naming Mark's 2 most unpleasant sycophants. "They'll be there. They always make a point of making me feel irrelevant." "They will attempt to engage," Leo predicted, a rare cold glint in his eyes. "And they will confirm their own irrelevance. Remember, a man who needs to announce his power is powerless. We simply have to exist." She looked down at the sketchpad in her lap. It contained the initial concepts for the Academy's logo, a clean, minimalist design combining a square root symbol with a pencil line. Her work, her purpose. As the night of the gala approached, Sarah realized the nervous tremor in her stomach was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. She wasn't preparing for a social event. She was preparing for a liberation ceremony. She was going to retrieve the self-worth Mark had tried to steal, and she was going to wear it in the most beautiful, defiant shade of crimson she could find. The pivot had occurred. Sarah was no longer Leo's partner. She was his co-conspirator in redefining success. The grand ballroom at the Pierre was, as Sarah remembered, a breathtaking assault on the senses. The lighting, carefully calibrated by a French designer, was golden and harsh, designed to highlight jewelry and conceal character flaws. Crystal chandeliers dripped blinding, fake light onto a churning, turbulent sea of black tuxedos and shimmering, muted gowns. The air was a heavy, cloying mix of expensive cologne champagne and the faint metallic tang of unearned entitlement. Lenore and Leo slipped in through a side entrance near the kitchen, a concrete action that immediately set them apart from the grand public entrance. Sarah, in her crimson gown, was a living, breathing slash of defiant color in the room's monochrome landscape of black and silver. The dress demanded attention, but it was subtle. Leo, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that had no visible designer label, was, for the moment, practically invisible. He wore no watch. His cufflinks were simple matte obsidian. To the sharks of New York society, Leo was just a man accompanying a very striking woman. He was, in their brutally simple calculation, a nobody. "Enjoying the show?" Leo murmured, his hand lightly resting on the small of her back, a grounding point of steady warmth. "It's fascinating," Sarah replied. "Look at the patterns. They stand in groups of 4, facing inward, talking only about themselves. If someone more powerful approaches, the group scatters immediately." "Territorial posturing," Leo agreed, "a ritual older than finance itself." The subtext was shared. We are observers, no longer participants in their game. They found a quiet vantage point near the grand French doors, where the cool night air offered a faint relief from the ballroom's heat. From there, Sarah spotted Mark. He was holding court near the main bar, a self-appointed gravitational center. He was loud, expansive, commanding. On his arm was a woman Sarah vaguely recognized as a model named Cassandra. Impossibly tall, stunningly beautiful, and possessing a perpetual empty smile. She was less a person and more a human accessory, a mirror reflecting Mark's own inflated vanity. This was the emotional fantasy Mark lived for. The applause, the admiration, the physical evidence that he was winning. Sarah felt the familiar tension rise in her neck, but this time it was mixed with a powerful, almost pitying amusement. She took a slow, deep breath, adjusting her composure. "The lion is in his den," she murmured. "Let the show come to us," Leo replied, his hand tightening slightly, his eyes watching the room with an almost scientific detachment. The first ripple of the inevitable confrontation began when Todd Bishop, Mark's jackal, spotted Sarah. Todd's eyes, narrow, close-set, lit up with malicious glee. He detached himself from Mark's orbit and made a beeline, licking his chops at the opportunity to deliver the first humiliating verbal blow. "Showtime," Sarah whispered, her heart pounding a quick micro-cliffhanger beat of anticipation. This was it. The moment she had willingly returned for. Todd Bishop arrived, his presence a blast of aggressive, cheap cologne. He gave a cursory, dismissive glance at Leo before focusing his full, pitying attention on Sarah. "Sarah Connolly, goodness, I barely recognized you. You look so rested," Todd said, his voice dripping with false concern, the subtext clear. "You look older, and you've clearly settled for less." "Hello, Todd," Sarah replied, her voice a cool, controlled instrument. "And you must be the artist's assistant," Todd said, turning to Leo, dismissing his simple tuxedo. "What line of work are you in exactly, Alex? Something creative, perhaps? My wife is looking for a new consultant to redecorate the lake house." Leo offered a small, placid smile. "Something like that." Todd smirked, satisfied with his quick victory. "Right, well, James is just over there, telling the most fascinating story about his new fund. You know, Sterling Vance Select is already outperforming the market. Bam! A voice, booming, authoritative, and accustomed to total obedience, cut through the din, silencing Todd mid-sentence. "Alex, my God, there you are. I've been looking all over for you." Richard Sterling, the host of the evening, and a true power broker whose name commanded respect even from Mark, descended upon their group like a friendly hurricane. He was a man who knew exactly who mattered in any room, and he didn't waste time on the irrelevant. Richard Sterling completely, utterly ignored Todd Bishop, looking right through him as if he were a pane of glass. "Alex, my friend," Richard boomed, clapping Leo warmly on the shoulder. "Thank you for finally agreeing to this. When we heard you'd accept the award, the board was ecstatic. Your foundation's contribution to the STEM Arts Initiative is, quite frankly, transformative, game-changing." Todd Bishop froze, his champagne glass halfway to his mouth. His eyes darted between Leo, the artist's assistant, and Richard Sterling, the undisputed king of the room. The gold watch on his wrist suddenly felt heavy, meaningless. His brain, adept at calculating social equations, seemed to have locked up, presenting an error message. The nobody is being called my friend by the king. Unsolvable. "Richard, it's my pleasure," Leo said, his voice calm, contrasting sharply with the chaotic energy of Sterling. "The work is important, and I'm glad you have a chance to meet my partner, Sarah Connolly." Richard Sterling's attention immediately shifted to Sarah. He took her hand, his smile becoming warmer, more genuine. "Ms. Connolly, any partner of Alex's is a friend of ours. I hope he's not boring you to tears with talk of quantum processing power." "Not at all, Mr. Sterling," Sarah replied, her voice firm and steady. "I find it utterly fascinating." She was not just seen, she was validated by a power structure far beyond Mark's reach. The effect on the surrounding crowd was immediate. The whispers intensified. The code monkey was the honoree. The beautiful woman in crimson was his partner. The equation had flipped. And then Mark Thompson saw them. He had been holding court, gesturing wildly, describing his latest aggressive market bet. But he stopped, his voice dying in his throat as he registered the scene. Sarah, radiant and calm, standing beside the anonymous man who was being clapped on the shoulder by Richard Sterling. Mark walked towards them, his movement stiff, the golden lighting of the room making his face look pale and sickly. "Lenore," Mark said, his voice strained. He managed a curt nod at Leo. "You're mingling. Richard, good to see you. I was just catching up with my ex-wife." He emphasized the ex, a desperate attempt to assert the only control he had left, historical possession. Richard Sterling didn't even turn around fully. "Thompson, yes. Well, I was just congratulating Alex here, a visionary. The mayor is here tonight, Alex, dying to speak to you about your West Side Tech campus plans." The West Side Tech campus, another casual, world-changing project. Mark's eyes widened. He could hear the name Alex Chen connecting in the labyrinth of his mind, linking to whispers, to the small, dismissed articles in Forbes about Ethelred Labs, the quiet giant of AI. Valdez, Chen, Nexus. Chen. Mark finally managed to choke out, the name a jagged stone in his throat. Of Nexus. Leo, who had been patiently waiting for the chaos to subside, finally turned his full, unblinking blue gaze on Mark. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at the man who had dismissed him as irrelevant. "That's right, Mark," Leo said, his voice calm, even, and devastatingly precise. "I'm the code monkey." The words were a physical blow, a gut punch of pure, unadulterated reality. Mark's fragile ego, built on the shifting sands of public perception and market aggression, shattered. He had mocked the one man in the room whose wealth and power were truly unassailable. He had driven his wife into the arms of a titan. He looked at Sarah, truly saw her for the first time in years, and saw not anger, but a cool, distant pity. The micro cliffhanger was over. The game had been won. The orchestra swelled as Richard Sterling was called to the stage. Leo took Sarah's hand, his fingers lacing through hers, and they began the long walk to the head table. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Mark Thompson and Todd Bishop were left standing there, frozen, their faces canvases of utter humiliation. Sarah felt the 100 pairs of eyes on her, but the scrutiny no longer brought shame. It brought power. She wasn't an accessory. She was the reason the room had stopped breathing. Leo, stepping onto the stage, became instantly magnetic. He spoke not with the bombast of a financial titan, but with the conviction of a visionary. "I started out with a second-hand computer and an idea," Leo began, his voice easily filling the cavernous ballroom. "And the one thing I learned is that the most powerful thing in the world is not capital, it's curiosity." He spoke of his origins, the strategic mention of the Code Monkey origin story, a subtle, deliberate dagger aimed across the room. He spoke of the future, a future where AI was a tool for human flourishing, not merely market manipulation. Then he steered the narrative back to his true co-conspirator. "My partner often reminds me that innovation without beauty is just noise. Technology without art is meaningless. We talk about STEM education, but we often forget the arts, the creative thinking that allows us to ask, what if?" He paused, sweeping his gaze across the room, finding Sarah's eyes. The intimacy of the moment was profound, a secret shared between two people in a room full of thousands. Tonight, Nexus is not just making a donation to the STEM program. We are partnering with the City of New York to build a new institution, a sanctuary for curiosity and creation, where technology and the arts will be taught side by side. He took a breath before delivering the final total annihilation of Mark's world. "And it is my profound honor to announce that it will be named the Sarah Connolly Academy for Arts and Innovation." A collective, massive gasp swept through the ballroom. It was followed by a silence so absolute that Sarah could hear the shutter clicks of the photographers. Mark Thompson, watching from the floor, didn't just see his ex-wife honored. He saw her name inscribed on a permanent public billion-dollar monument to his own spectacular misjudgment. Sarah felt the heat of pride wash over her. This wasn't revenge, it was redemption. She was not the defeated ex-wife. She was the namesake of the future. The room erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. Leo stepped down, meeting her eyes. "You deserve to have your name on something that will change lives," he whispered. The immediate fallout for Mark was swift and severe. The furious buzzing of his phone started before Leo finished the speech. The micro cliffhanger of the evening was resolved, but a terrifying new one began for Mark. His short position on a key Ethel-Red competitor, based on his arrogant dismissal of Leo, vaporized collapsing Sterling Vance Select. The next morning's headline summed it up perfectly: "The Code Monkey wins." The immediate aftermath was a blur of vindication. Sarah's photo, poised, powerful, standing next to Leo, was everywhere. She received dozens of calls, not of pity, but of admiration. A few days later, a package arrived at her Astoria apartment. It was a preposterously large arrangement of white roses, a gaudy, desperate gesture. Tucked inside was a letter, penned in Mark's familiar aggressive script. "Sarah, I had no idea. I was blind. You know what we had was real. Don't let this new life swallow you. He can't love the real you. Please let me see you, James." Sarah read the letter twice. She searched for the familiar emotional hook, the anger, the hurt, the flicker of manipulation. But there was nothing. It was a relic from a past she had completely outgrown. His love had been about possession. Leo's love was about elevation. She placed the letter gently in the recycling bin. The real shift was not in denying Mark, but in embracing her new purpose. Sarah resigned from her teaching post and threw herself into her new role as the Academy's executive director. She began spending her days at the construction site in the Bronx, wearing a hard hat and boots, feeling more fulfilled than she ever had in a designer gown. She was a builder now, directing architects, ensuring the practical elements served the artistic vision. One argument with the lead architect summarized her transition. The initial designs placed the main art studios facing south for maximum light. "We need the south light for the gallery," the architect insisted. "No," Sarah said firmly, tapping the blueprints with a pencil. "The studio space needs northern light. It's consistent, cool, and prevents the sun from bleaching the pigments. Direct light is for showing finished work. Indirect light is for creating it." The architect, initially dismissive, realized she was talking about art, not aesthetics. He conceded. She had found the value of northern light. Subtext: she had found the steady, unwavering light of authenticity, free from Mark's blinding glare. Mark's final collapse was quiet. His venture fund dissolved after his investors realized he was not only publicly humiliated, but professionally incompetent in the tech landscape. He sold the Southampton house and retreated into private exile. Sarah and Leo traveled that year, not to be seen, but to see. They prioritized experience over display. They hiked the foggy peaks of Patagonia, their silence punctuated only by the crunch of their boots. In these quiet moments, Sarah realized the true wealth wasn't in the Patek Philippe watch or the square footage of a mansion. It was in the shared experience, the mutual respect, and the lifetime of quiet purpose they had just begun to build. It was late autumn, a year after the gala, and Central Park was ablaze with the fiery colors of the maples. Sarah, heading to a quick coffee break with Leo after a meeting at the Nexus Foundation, walked the winding paths near the reservoir. She carried only her charcoal sketchpad, no longer a defense, but a tool of creation. She saw him on a park bench. It was Mark. He was alone, hunched over, his once impeccable suit rumpled and ill-fitting. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness that had carved lines into his face. He looked older, smaller, a man diminished by the weight of his own hubris. As she drew closer, their eyes met across the paved path. A flicker of desperation, a plea for recognition crossed his face. He looked like he wanted to stand up, to speak, to bridge the massive chasm between them. But then a sleek, understated black electric sedan pulled up to the curb. Leo got out. He was carrying 2 simple coffee cups. He walked directly toward Sarah, his face relaxing into an easy, warm smile. He didn't even notice the broken man on the bench. He had no reason to. Mark had been fully erased from his reality. Leo reached Sarah and kissed her. A simple, everyday gesture of affection that spoke volumes more than Mark's grand, empty gestures ever had. He wrapped a strong arm around her shoulders, handing her a cup. Mark watched them, his face a canvas of profound, soul-crushing regret. He saw the easy intimacy, the deep, abiding respect in Leo's eyes, and realized he hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the single opportunity to be connected to something real, meaningful, and enduring. Mark stood up, his suit coat sagging around his shoulders, and walked away. He didn't look back. He was a ghost in the city's hustle, swallowed by the uncaring bustle of life. Sarah watched him go until he was out of sight. A final, quiet release washed over her. He was no longer a shadow, not even a memory. He was a completed lesson. She leaned her head on Leo's shoulder, the crisp autumn air cool on her cheeks, smelling faintly of sandalwood and coffee. She tightened her grip on her sketchpad. Her life was not a reaction to the past, but a commitment to the future. The drama was over. The healing had begun. The only light she needed was the honest, steady light of the northern sky. Sarah Connolly's journey is a powerful demonstration of emotional resilience and the cost of chasing surface-level success. When Mark Thompson scorned her life and her love, he confirmed the exact psychological flaw that led to his own spectacular downfall, the inability to see value where there is no price tag. True power, as Leo Valdez proved, is quiet, intentional, and defined by the lives it uplifts. If you've ever felt judged for choosing your own path, this is your story. Hit the like button if Sarah's redemption resonated with you, share this video with someone who needs a dose of resilience, and subscribe for more inspiring stories of authenticity and triumph.